In our first series, we talked about the importance of sealing as New Zealand's first export industry and described that first exploratory mission to Dusky Sound in 1792. Now, the modest returns from that expedition meant there were no major follow-ups for another 10 years.
By then, however, the sealing colonies in Tasmania's Bass Strait, preferred by the Australian-based sealers, had become severely depleted. But sealskins were now reaching high prices in London as well as China, so it had become an even more lucrative trade. The Sydney merchants' ongoing profits from sealing depended on finding new seal colonies to exploit.
Attention therefore turned south again to New Zealand, and in April 1803, Captain Joseph Oliphant brought his little vessel, the Endeavour, the third vessel of that name to be involved in early voyages to southern New Zealand, in for a closer look. He called at Dusky Bay and then came further south to this rugged coastline at the entrances to Preservation and Chalky Inlets.
Even though Oliphant's men brought back only a couple of thousand sealskins, they'd arrived at the wrong time of year when the seal pups would have been out to sea. This was valuable new information about a hitherto unknown area of the southern coastline.
Oliphant had also chanced upon local Maori, who he described as having been friendly and helpful, another positive sign for the future. His expedition was quickly followed by other Sydney-based sealing parties, and southern New Zealand's first sealing boom was underway. Sealing was tough work for tough men in a tough environment, but it was also brutally simple. A gang of 6 or a dozen men would be landed on a rocky piece of coastline of the sort favoured by fur seals, and they would plant themselves between the seals and the sea, making a lane with 2 men abreast and 3 or 4 pairs of them, making a line through which seals would be driven, rather like drafting sheep. As the seals ran this gauntlet to reach the safety of the sea, they would be smacked on the snout with a wooden club, and stunned, they would then be finished off with a lance or a knife driven into the breast.
Then came the brutal and messy business of skinning, with each animal cut open from the jaw to the tail and the skin carefully stripped. They would then be pegged out to dry or salted to preserve them for eventual shipment back to base.
There's archaeological evidence of sealing gangs camping out in caves like this one on Cape Providence, as well as at Sealers Bay on Chalky Island. And there's even a chart from 1823 that shows sealers' huts at Lee Bay on Southport.
All the cave shelters reveal a layered history of use, going far back into Maori prehistory at the deepest level and right up to the 19th century near the surface layers, with artefacts that clearly link to the sealers' era. To southern Maori, these foreign sealers were known as the Tākata Pora, the people of the ships.
The most famous cave that sheltered sealing gangs is undoubtedly Grono's Cave, just around the corner at Cape Providence from where we are, but today we couldn't access it because of the weather conditions. It's named for Captain John Grono, the Welsh-born sealing captain who's responsible for a whole suite of Welsh place names from his home area being applied to features of Fiordland, including most notably Milford Sound. The cave is a large, airy space, well lit, quite cosy, protected from the sea, and an ideal spot to hunker down for shelter on a potentially hostile coast. Captain Grono made at least 9 voyages over here between 1805 and his final one in 1824.
Grono is directly linked to an amazing artefact discovered in 1905 and now in the Southern Museum collection. It is this piece of slate on which 2 messages have been scratched. The lower one includes Grono's name and that of his ship, the Elizabeth, with a date, 23rd December. More intriguing though is the first message on the slate, which was written by Captain John Dawson of the ship Samuel and contains the terse warning: beware of the natives, plenty at preservation.
Behind those few words lies a tangled web of intrigue and drama that stretches over a bloody 5-year period from 1819 to 1824. At its centre is an American ship called the General Gates, commanded by a notorious sealer from Boston, Captain Riggs, who bore the strikingly biblical first name, Abimelech.
Despite this connection with the good book, no one has a positive word to say about Riggs, who has gone down in history as a cruel tyrant who relentlessly abused and ill-treated his crew and seems to have caused some deep offence to Maori in the Furthest Strait that led to a vicious vendetta against his sealing gangs.
His voyage to New Zealand was one of those long-term sealing expeditions which would see a gang dropped off for an extended period. It could be 6 months or 12 months or even longer. But at the end of that time, the gang was supposed to be picked up again along with their harvest of skins.
In Abimelech Riggs' case, his sealing gangs were dropped off with inadequate supplies in the first place, and then left for long periods beyond their contracted terms while he got held up elsewhere or swanned about the wider Pacific looking for better trading opportunities. But worst of all, they bore the brunt of Maori fury over some offence that no one now knows the details of.
And throughout the sealing era, while Southern Maori were often reported as being friendly and helpful, woe betide any sealing gang that transgressed Tikanga, as the men from the General Gates must have done.
Tikanga is a really interesting issue. The word itself, when we break it down, the first half of that is tika, which means right. So tikanga is doing the right thing. And all of our tikanga talks about the right thing of everything being in balance and everything being in unison. You do the right thing to make sure that there's an equilibrium in the world, the universe and everything. I know that sounds like a great big concept, but pretty much that's exactly true. Examples that we look at with the sealers back in the day, if at times they transgressed the right ways of doing things and put the universe out of balance. So if they offended Maori in a way, or if there was a skirmish between the two, then that balance of power would need to be addressed. And that's that construct of utu as well, which isn't exactly revenge, but the idea that we have to get everything back into balance. We have to balance the ledgers, the books. So every now and again, up and down these coasts between the sealers and Maori, there were slight skirmishes. There were affronts that were made, and there was the need to put things back in balance.
One of the General Gates 12-man sealing parties was dropped off at Southport in Chalky Inlet in December 1821 for a 6-month stint. But when all of their scanty supply of rations was stolen by a Maori raiding party, they relocated further down the coast to Gates Harbour past Pusaka Point. But this proved no safer location, and when 2 of their number were killed by Maori, they returned to Southport, where they were discovered starving in December 1822, long after their pickup date, by Captain William Edwardson of the Snapper.
Brought back to full health by his provisions, the Americans rashly decided to go back to their second camp to collect sealskins that they had hidden there.
No sooner had they reached their old camp than 3 waka full of hostile Maori appeared off the coast, and in a blind panic, the American sealers took off into the bush and began heading back to Preservation Inlet, overland. Undeterred, the Maori warriors were soon in hot pursuit. Can you imagine the terror of it? But somehow they made it through the bush, back to the inlet here, put together a primitive raft, and then floated across to Seep Cove, from which they were able to race over the narrow neck of land to Southport over in Chalky Inlet and back to Captain Edwardson on the Snapper.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because when the Maori pursuers appeared over the bay, Captain Williamson was amazed to see that their party included 2 white men. One was Jimmy Cadell, an English boy who had survived the attack on his sealing party years earlier and been adopted into the tribe. He was now a man of chiefly mana, who had completely adopted a Maori lifestyle, including a full moko on his face. Despite the frantic pursuit across the bush and inlets, the whole war party now came aboard the English ship in peace. Their enmity was solely with the Americans because of their past transgressions, and even they were now safe under Edwardson's protection.
And then Abimelech Riggs turned up, anchoring across the sound here at Northport. Now, not surprisingly, some of his gangs from the General Gates refused to rejoin him on that ship here and preferred to stay with Edwardson on the Snapper. And totally unabashed by what had happened to them, or by the killing of another sealing gang that he'd left on Stewart Island, Captain Riggs proceeded to drop off 2 more sealing gangs, one here at Northport and Chalky Inlet, another one back at Stewart Island, where exactly the same fate befell them as the earlier gang. There were to be just 2 survivors of that gang, an Aboriginal woman who was the wife of one of the sealers and her baby, who hid out in the bush for months until they were finally rescued by Captain John Dawson of the Samuel in late 1823.
It was Dawson who scratched out the warning on the piece of slate in Grono's cave. When Abimelech Riggs reappeared shortly after to find another of his gangs wiped out, he is said to have taken his revenge by running down some waka in Fovo Strait. And then he disappeared. After selling his cargo of sealskins in China, his ship was lost at sea.
And now came a decisive shift in the relationship between Maori and the visiting mariners. Captain Edwardson's voyage on the Snap had been an exploratory mission to test out the possibilities of trading with southern Maori for dressed flax, and it came at a time when returns from sealing were dropping dramatically, brought about by the rapid depletion of stocks caused by the indiscriminate killing of breeding seals. Edwardson's diplomacy with Jimmy Cadell and his Maori companions, including gifting them some pigs, the very first pigs in Southland, had been the most important consequence of that visit. And when a follow-up expedition was mounted by Captain Rudolphus Kent in May 1823, he found that the Southern chiefs had adopted a new policy.
As Kent wrote in his diary, "They with great warmth told me they did not intend to kill any more white men, now that we had become friends by commencing trade."
Henceforward, seals would be less important to European vessels visiting this area than the pork, flax and potatoes that Maori communities would trade with them for highly desirable pieces of technology like whaleboats and muskets. It was a new era altogether.